The afternoon sun in the great house was always thin. It came in through the tall, clean windows but never seemed to warm the air. The silence was the deepest thing in it. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, expensive one. Bought and paid for. In the music room, the silence was polished to a high shine. Marla moved through it with the ease of long practice, her cloth circling over the dark, perfect wood of the grand piano. It was a beautiful monster of an instrument, all gleaming curves and gold lettering. To her, it was just another surface to dust, a landscape of potential fingerprints. She knew its value only from the careful instructions she'd been given. Use this specific cloth, never that spray. It was a sculpture, not a thing to be played. Its lid was always shut. Her daughter, a girl of 10 with careful eyes, sat on a stool in the hallway just outside the door. She had a school book open on her knees, but she wasn't reading. She was listening to the whisper of her mother's cloth, to the faint hum of the mansion's climate control, to the distant, rhythmic tap of a single key being pressed somewhere deep in the house. That would be him, Mr. Thorne. Elias Thorne was in his study, a room that looked out over the city, but felt like a capsule in space. He was a man who had solved problems for a living, breaking the world into data and algorithms until he had more money than places to put it. Now, his main problem was the silence he had created. He found himself tapping a single key on his computer keyboard over and over, just to hear a sound that he controlled. Tap, tap, tap. He stood, restless, and drifted from his study toward the center of the house. The soft tap of his own leather soles on the marble floor was the only announcement of his presence. He paused in the doorway of the music room, observing the scene. There was Marla, her back to him, methodically working, and there, in the shaft of thin sunlight from the hall, was the girl, Chloe. He knew her name from the paperwork, from the occasional polite nod. She was part of the background of his house, a quiet, mobile piece of the furniture that was his staff. He watched her for a moment. She was looking at the piano, not with longing, but with a kind of plain curiosity, as if it were a large, strange animal. On a whim, a small bubble of something that wasn't quite boredom and wasn't quite charity. He spoke. "You can try it, if you want." His voice made Marla jump slightly, her hand pausing on the piano's lid. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Elias stepped into the room, gesturing vaguely at the instrument. "The piano, go on. It's just for fun. Give it a try while your mother finishes up." He saw the look that flashed between mother and daughter, a quick, silent conversation of worry and caution. Marla gave a tiny, tight nod. "It's all right," she said softly to her daughter. "Just be careful." Chloe slid off the stool, her school book forgotten. She approached the piano as one might approach the edge of a cliff, with a mix of fear and fascination. Elias, feeling oddly pleased with his own magnanimity, went to the plush chair in the corner and sat down, pulling out his phone. This would be a moment of amusing noise, a break in the monotony. He expected clumsy banging, the chaotic joy of a child unleashed on a forbidden object. Chloe stared at the closed lid. Marla stepped over and gently lifted it, revealing the stark, orderly parade of black and white keys. The girl's small hand reached out. One finger, index, pressed down on a middle C. Plink. The note hung in the silent room, pure and round. It seemed louder than it should have been. She pressed the key next to it, plink, then another. A simple, ascending scale, just 3 notes. But the touch was soft, purposeful, not a smash, but a press. Elias glanced up from his phone, his attention mildly caught. This wasn't the wild banging he'd anticipated. There was a hesitancy, but not a randomness. She was listening. Chloe's brow furrowed. She looked down at her hands in her lap, then back at the keys. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. She placed her hands back on the keys, not in any proper position, but naturally. And then she played a phrase. It was only 5 notes, but they were connected, a little musical sentence. They sounded familiar, a ghost of a tune. Elias put his phone down, screen first, on his knee. He knew that phrase. It was from something Mozart, a simple melody often taught to beginners. But she hadn't played it like a beginner. She had played it with a tiny, instinctive swell on the 3rd note, a whisper of feeling that made it sound like music, not just notes. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, his voice cutting the quiet. Chloe's hands flew back to her lap as if the keys had grown hot. I don't know," she whispered, looking at her mother for help. "It's from the assembly at school last month," Marla said, her voice gentle but firm. "The visiting musician played it. She must have remembered it." "Remembered it?" Elias said. He leaned forward. You heard it once. A month ago. Chloe nodded, her eyes now fixed on the patterns in the Persian rug. Play it again, he said. It wasn't a request. It was the tone he used when he needed data. Mr. Thorne, she's just… Marla started, please, he said, softening the command only slightly. Just once more, I'm curious. After a long moment, Chloe turned back to the piano. She took a small breath. Then, her small hands found the keys again. She played the 5-note phrase. But this time, she didn't stop. Her left hand drifted down and pressed a single, deep note as a foundation. Then her right hand continued, picking out the next few notes of the melody. Notes Elias was sure she hadn't played before. She was reconstructing it, finding the path of the tune by ear, note by tentative note. It was halting, full of pauses where she listened to the silence, searching for the next sound in her memory. But it was unmistakably the melody. She was pulling it, fully formed, from the air of a school auditorium a month in the past. Elias stood up. He didn't mean to. It was a physical reaction. The boredom, the restless tapping, all of it vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. This wasn't a child amusing herself. This was something else. A strange, wildflower growing in the crack of his sterile, marble floor. He walked slowly to the piano, standing beside it, looking down at the top of the girl's head. Can you do that with other things? He asked. Songs from the radio? Chloe shrugged, shrinking under his gaze. I guess, if I like them. Marla had stopped polishing completely. She stood by the wall, her cloth held tightly in both hands, watching her daughter, watching her employer. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The thin sunlight felt different. The silence was no longer empty. It was charged, waiting. Elias Thorne, the man who had built an empire on recognizing patterns no one else could see, saw one now. It was not in lines of code or market trends. It was in the delicate curve of a child's fingers over ivory, in the untaught, natural music pulled from memory. He had asked her to play for fun, but as the last note she'd found faded into the waiting quiet, he felt a thrill that had nothing to do with fun, and everything to do with the shock of discovering a secret that had been living, quietly, in his own house all along. The silence in the music room after Chloe played was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the empty silence from before. This one was full. It buzzed with the leftover sound of the notes and with a sudden, sharp attention. Elias Thorne stood by the piano, not looking at the girl or her mother, but at the space above the keys, as if he could still see the music hanging there. He blinked, coming back to the room. He saw Marla's posture, straight and stiff by the wall. He saw Chloe, small on the piano bench, her shoulders hunched a little, waiting for a scolding or a dismissal. Thank you, Chloe, he said, and his voice was softer than he intended. He cleared his throat. That was interesting. He turned and walked out without another word, leaving mother and daughter in the charged quiet. He went back to his study, but he didn't sit at his computer. He stood at the window, watching the city lights begin to prick through the evening. His mind, always a machine for solving puzzles, was working on a new one, a living, breathing puzzle. Perfect pitch, auditory memory, a raw, untrained talent. The terms clicked into place in his head. He had sponsored a music competition once for tax purposes. He remembered the judges talking about such things in hushed, reverent tones. They were things you were born with, not taught. For the next few days, the house returned to its normal rhythm. Marla cleaned. The silence settled back in, but Elias found himself listening for the soft sounds of their work. He found excuses to walk past the music room when Marla was in there. He would nod, make some comment about the weather, his eyes drifting to the closed lid of the piano. The idea formed slowly, taking shape like a blueprint. It was a proposition, an experiment. He wasn't a cruel man. He considered it an opportunity, an investment in an underutilized asset. He found Marla in the kitchen, wiping down already spotless counters. Marla, he began. She turned, her expression polite and neutral. About your daughter, Chloe. Marla's hand stilled on the counter. Yes, sir. She has an obvious aptitude with the piano. She just has a good ear. Mr. Thorne, she's always been like that with songs. A good ear, he repeated, nodding as if she'd confirmed a theory. That's a rare thing. It shouldn't be wasted. He leaned against the doorway, adopting a casual tone. I have a proposal. When she comes here after school, instead of sitting in the hall, she can use the piano, properly, to explore. I'll pay you for her time, an extra hourly rate. Consider it a study period, Marla's face was a careful mask, but her eyes were wary. "That's very kind, sir, but she's just a child. She has homework, and it's your piano, a very expensive. It's gathering dust," he interrupted, a flicker of impatience in his voice. "It's meant to be played. Think of it as me renting it to her. And you, a few hours a week. No pressure, just fun." He used her word from the hallway, but it sounded different coming from his mouth now. It had a purpose. He saw the conflict in her face. The extra money was real, and money was a constant, quiet pressure he knew she carried. But her protectiveness was stronger. "I don't know," she said slowly. "We keep it simple," he pressed, his tone becoming more businesslike. "You're always here supervising. She plays, or doesn't play. No expectations, just access. That's all I'm offering, access." The word access did it. Marla knew better than anyone in that house what doors were closed and which ones were open. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right, a trial. And I'm with her the whole time, of course," Elias said, a smile touching his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was settled. The next afternoon, the dynamic in the music room had changed. Chloe sat at the piano again, but now it was official. Her mother sat in the corner with a mending basket, her presence a solid, quiet anchor. Elias did not sit in the room. He pretended to work in his study, but he left the door ajar. At first, Chloe just played simple things. Songs from cartoons, pop tunes from the car radio. She would start and stop, her fingers finding melodies in a halting, searching way. But then she would latch onto a phrase and repeat it, varying it, playing it faster, then slower, as if testing how it felt. Elias started to leave things out. One day, a book of simple scales was open on the music stand. He watched from the hallway as Chloe glanced at it, confused by the lines and dots. She ignored it and instead played a scale by ear, perfectly, up and down. Another day, he left a beginner's book open to a folk song, Greensleeves. He heard her struggle for 10 minutes, trying to match the notes on the page to the keys. Frustrated, she stopped. She closed her eyes, hummed a bit of the tune she'd just tried to read, and then her hands went to the keys and played it fluidly, from memory, adding a little sad trill at the end. It was the most fascinating process he had ever witnessed. Her mind clearly did not work in the traditional way. It bypassed the rules and went straight to the sound. He needed a professional opinion. He needed data. He hired a piano teacher, a retired woman from the conservatory with a kind face and sharp eyes. He presented it to Marla as a free lesson, just to see. Marla agreed, her suspicion warring with a deep-seated hope she wouldn't even admit to herself. The teacher, an older woman named Irene, arrived. She was warm with Chloe, asking her to play anything she liked. Chloe, shy, played the bit of Mozart from the first day. Irene's eyebrows went up. She then conducted a series of simple tests. She played chords on the piano, complex clusters of notes, and asked Chloe to sing them back. Chloe did, her voice clear and exact. She played a long, meandering melody once and asked Chloe to replicate it. Chloe did, almost note for note. After half an hour, Irene asked to speak with Elias and Marla in the hallway. Marla stood with her arms crossed, a fortress. "Well," Irene said, her voice low with a kind of professional awe, "she is quite extraordinary. The perfect pitch is undeniable. Her auditory memory is photographic, but for sound, she's a true prodigy. The raw material is there, of the sort I've only seen a handful of times in my life." Marla's breath caught. The word prodigy hung in the air, huge and terrifying. "What does she need?" Elias asked, his voice focused. Irene looked at him, then at Marla, understanding the unspoken tension. "She needs a teacher, a special one, not to give her talent, but to give it language, to teach her how to read music, so she can play anything, not just what she hears, to give her technique, so her hands can keep up with her mind. Without it," she sighed, "the talent will stay locked in. It might even fade. It's like having a voice that can hit any note, but no songs to sing." After Irene left, the silence in the grand hallway was heavy. Marla looked shaken. The confirmation from an expert made it real, and real felt dangerous. Elias turned to her, his mind already building the next blueprint. "Marla, this is an incredible opportunity. We can get her that teacher, the best one. We can get her a proper piano for your apartment. This isn't just about playing for fun anymore. This is about her future." He saw it not as pressure, but as logic. A problem had been identified. Immense potential was being wasted. The solution was clear: provide resources. He didn't see the fear in Marla's eyes, or the way she looked at her daughter, still sitting small and confused at the giant piano, now labeled a prodigy. He only saw the thrilling, elegant solution taking shape. The experiment was yielding spectacular results, and he was ready to fund the next phase. The word prodigy changed everything. It hung in the air of the grand house long after the piano teacher had left. A word as heavy and polished as the furniture. For Elias Thorne, it was a key piece of data, a diagnosis that confirmed his hypothesis and demanded a solution. For Marla, it was a storm cloud settling over her daughter's head. In his study, Elias felt a rare, pure excitement. This was better than a promising stock tip or a new technology. This was a human potential, raw and unfiltered, and he had the resources to refine it. He spent the evening researching elite music tutors, youth conservatories, and the best digital pianos for home practice. He drafted a plan in his mind, neat and logical. Phase 1, secure a top-tier teacher. Phase 2, acquire a quality instrument for their apartment. Phase 3, structured practice regimen. Phase 4, audition preparation. It was a project plan, and Chloe was the project. He presented it to Marla 2 days later in the kitchen, a place that felt neutral to him. He spoke with calm, assured enthusiasm, laying out the steps like a benevolent road map. So, I've found 3 teachers we can interview, he began, leaning against the marble island. All of them have trained students who've won national competitions. We'll have them come here, see who Chloe connects with. Then, I've looked at pianos. A good upright would be best for your space. We can have it delivered next week. The key is consistent daily practice. The teacher will set a schedule, of course, but we should aim for at least 2 focused hours after school, with more on weekends. Marla stood by the sink, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She had been wiping a glass, and she still held it, suspended in the air. Her face, usually so carefully composed, was pale. 2 hours, she said, her voice quiet. After school? Mr. Thorne, she's 10. She has homework. She needs to play outside with friends. Elias waved a hand, a gentle dismissal of the objection. This is play, Marla. For someone with her gift, this is the most profound play there is. The homework can be managed. This is an investment in her entire future. This could mean a full scholarship to a school like Juilliard. It could mean a career. A career? Marla put the glass down carefully, as if it might break. She's a child. She doesn't need a career. She needs a childhood. They're not mutually exclusive, Elias said, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. He wasn't used to his clear logic being met with such resistance. Think of the opportunity. This is a door opening that opens for almost no one. I'm offering to hold it open for her. But you're not asking if she wants to walk through it. Marla's voice rose, sharp with a fear she could no longer contain. You're making a blueprint for her life. You're talking about schedules and auditions and investments. You said it was for fun. You said no pressure. Now you have her entire life planned on a spreadsheet. Elias straightened up, his own patience thinning. I'm trying to help, to keep that talent from being wasted. What's the alternative? She comes here, tinkers for a few years, and then what? The world is full of could-have-beens, Marla. I'm trying to prevent her from being one. You're trying to own it. The words burst out of her, raw and angry. You found something fascinating in your house, and now you want to put it in a glass case and watch it grow according to your instructions. She's not a fascinating experiment, Mr. Thorne. She's my little girl. She gets scared at loud noises. She still sleeps with a worn-out stuffed rabbit. She cries when she can't get a math problem. She's a person, not a prodigy. The silence that followed was electric. Elias stared at her, stunned. No one spoke to him like that, and her words hit a mark he didn't know was there. Own it, experiment. They made his generosity feel ugly. Clinical. His voice cooled, turning formal. I see, so you would deny her this chance. Out of what? Protectiveness. Fear, yes, Marla said, tears of defiance now in her eyes. Out of protectiveness. You see a musical wunderkind. I see a child who might lose herself trying to become what you want her to be. I see the light in her eyes when she figures out a tune for herself. And I see it going out under the weight of your structured practice regimen. I won't let you turn her joy into a job, even if that joy could be her life's work. He countered, his jaw tight. It's not your decision to make. She fired back. It's hers and mine. And right now, she's 10. Her job is to learn, and to grow, and to be happy, not to be a project. They stood facing each other across the vast, expensive kitchen, a chasm between them wider than the polished floor. It was a clash of two worlds, two utterly different understandings of what was valuable. He saw a rare, precious resource to be cultivated for maximum yield. She saw a fragile, growing thing to be sheltered from storms, even the storms of good fortune. Down the hall, unnoticed by either of them, Chloe had been sitting at the piano. She had heard the raised voices, the sharp tones carrying through the quiet house. Her hands, which had been idly picking out a tune from a song she'd heard on the radio, had fallen still. She looked down at the black and white keys. They didn't look like fun anymore. They looked like the reason her mother's voice was tight and angry. They looked like the reason Mr. Thorne was making those plans that sounded like a school timetable. For the next 100 years, the word prodigy echoed in her head. It felt like a heavy, itchy coat she had to wear. She softly closed the lid over the keys. The gentle thump of final sound. She slid off the bench and walked to the doorway of the kitchen. She saw her mother's back, rigid with emotion. She saw Mr. Thorne's face, confused and stern. Both adults noticed her then. The argument froze in mid-air. "Chloe, honey," Marla started, her voice instantly shifting to a forced calm. "I don't think I want the piano in our apartment," Chloe said, her voice very small. She wasn't looking at Elias. She was looking at her mother's hands, clenched at her sides. "It's loud. The neighbors might complain." It was a child's excuse, thin and transparent. It wasn't about the noise. It was about the weight of the future they were arguing over, a weight she could feel settling on her own small shoulders. Elias looked from the mother to the daughter. He saw the fear in Marla's eyes, now mixed with a fierce love. He saw the confusion and withdrawal in Chloe's face. His grand plan, his elegant solution, was crumbling not because of a flaw in the logic, but because of something he hadn't factored in: human emotion. The heart of the project was rebelling. He gave a stiff, slow nod. "I understand," he said, but his voice was hollow. The blueprint was tearing. The experiment, it seemed, was over. The coldness that settled over the house after the argument was worse than the old silence. It was a living quiet, thick with things that had been said and could not be unsaid. Marla cleaned with a fierce, mechanical focus, her movements sharp and efficient. She spoke only when necessary, her answers to Elias clipped and professional. "Yes, sir. No, sir. I'll see to it, sir." The music room door remained shut. The piano was a closed coffin. Elias found himself avoiding that wing of the house altogether. He went back to tapping his keyboard, but the sound was irritating now, a reminder of another tapping that had started all of this. He felt a strange, nagging frustration. He had offered a golden opportunity, a life-changing gift. He had been logical, generous, and it had been thrown back in his face as if he were some kind of monster. He couldn't understand it. For Marla, the fear was slowly being replaced by a steely resolve and a deep sadness. She watched her daughter. Chloe was quiet, too quiet. She did her homework, she read her books, but the light, humming energy she used to have was dimmed. She didn't sing snippets of songs while tying her shoes. She didn't tap rhythms on the kitchen table. It was as if she had put the music away in a box and locked it, just to keep the peace. One evening, as Marla was finishing the dusting in the library, she found Elias standing by the large window. He wasn't looking at the view. He was just standing there. "Sir," she said. "Preparing to leave, Marla," he said, not turning around. His voice was tired. "Do you truly believe I meant her harm?" She paused, her hand on the doorframe. The question hung in the air. She thought about the teacher's awestruck face, the plans for the piano, the word investment. She also thought about the first day, the genuine surprise in his eyes when Chloe played. "No," she said finally, the word pulled from her. "Not harm, but you don't see her. You see the product, the outcome. You don't see the child in the middle." He was silent for a long time. "And if the child wants it?" he asked quietly. Marla didn't have an answer. She left the room. The question following her. It followed her all the way home, to their small, warm apartment that smelled of laundry and cooked meals. She watched Chloe push her food around her plate. "Baby," Marla said softly, "talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours?" Chloe put her fork down. "Do you think the piano is mad at me?" she asked, her voice small. "Oh, honey, no, a piano can't be mad." "Then why does it feel bad in my chest when I think about it?" Marla got up and came around the table, kneeling beside her daughter's chair. "That's not the piano, sweetheart. That's all the other stuff, the arguing, the big plans, the grown-up worries. I just liked finding the songs," Chloe whispered, a tear tracing down her cheek. It was like a secret in my head, and then I could let it out. Now the secret feels too big, and everyone's looking at it. Marla hugged her tight, her heart breaking. She had fought so hard to protect her, but in doing so, had she also built a wall between her daughter and the thing she loved? The next day was Saturday, Marla's half day. As she was gathering her things to leave, Chloe, who had been sitting in the usual hallway spot with a book, stood up. She walked past her mother, past the closed door of the music room, and stopped at the open door of Elias's study. He was at his computer, the blue light reflecting on his glasses. He looked up, surprised. Chloe stood in the doorway, her small frame looking even smaller. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "can I talk to you?" "Just you." Marla, coming up behind her, started to say something, but Chloe looked back at her. "It's okay, Mom, please." After a tense moment, Marla nodded, her eyes filled with worry. She stepped back, leaving the doorway. Elias was stunned. He slowly took off his glasses. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Come in." Chloe didn't sit in the big leather chair. She stood in front of his desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She took a deep breath, like someone about to jump into a deep pool. "The music," she began, then stopped. She tried again. "You know how you have that big map on your wall, of the whole world?" Elias glanced at the large, framed topographic map behind him. "Yes, my music. In my head. It's like a map of a place only I can go. And the piano is like the car. To drive around in it." The analogy was childish, but painfully clear. "Mom is worried the car will break down or get a flat tire if I drive too far. You want to build a superhighway and give me a schedule for where to go every day." Elias sat perfectly still, listening. No one had ever explained anything to him like this, and she swallowed. "I don't want the superhighway, but maybe I could use a little better car, and maybe a map that other people can read, too, so I'm not always driving alone." She was negotiating. A 10-year-old was standing in his study, negotiating the terms of her own genius. Elias felt a humility so profound it was almost physical. "What?" he said, his voice rough. "Would that look like?" Chloe's words came a little faster now, as if she'd practiced them. "I want to learn to read the notes, the real ones on the paper, so I can play songs from anywhere, not just from my head. But I don't want a teacher who gets mad if I play it different. I want to stay in my school. I want to play basketball at the park on Saturdays, and my mom has to be there, always, when I'm learning. It's our project, not just yours." She laid out her conditions with a simple, devastating clarity. They were about preservation, not just progression, about keeping the soul of the thing alive. Elias looked at this small, serious girl. He saw the ghost of the woman she would become, someone who knew her own mind. He had been trying to manage a resource. She was asking him to support a person. He nodded, slowly. "And the fun?" he asked, the word feeling important again. A tiny, tentative smile touched her lips. "The fun is the driving. Just a driving. Wherever the map looks interesting. Sometimes with the windows down." For the first time since their argument, Elias felt the tight knot in his chest loosen. He had been so wrong. He had tried to take the wheel. All he'd been asked to do was help pay for the gas, "I think," he said, choosing his words with more care than he ever had in a business deal. "That those are very good terms. I would like to help with the better car, and the map reading lessons. But you and your mother are the drivers, always." Chloe's whole body seemed to relax. The weight she'd been carrying lifted, just a little. "Okay," she said softly. She turned and walked out. Marla was waiting in the hall, her face pale with anxiety. Chloe went to her and took her hand. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "We've figured it out." Marla looked over her daughter's head at Elias, who had come to stand in his doorway. His expression was different. The hard, focused intensity was gone, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. He gave a single, respectful nod. No grand plan was announced. No blueprint was drawn up. But the Cold War was over. The next week, when Marla and Chloe arrived, the door to the music room was open. On the piano's music stand was not a book of scales, but a simple, colorful book of folk songs from around the world. A note, written in Elias's precise hand, was tucked into the cover. It read, "For exploring, no highways." The years that followed were not what anyone had planned, and that was their great strength. There was no grand schedule, no countdown to a major competition. There was only the slow, steady rhythm of growth. The teacher they found was an older man named Henry. a former concert pianist who had grown tired of what he called the note-perfect robot factory. He was a patient man with kind eyes and knotted, skillful hands. His agreement with Elias, mediated carefully by Marla, was clear. He would teach Chloe the language of music, the notes, the theory, the technique, but he would never try to own the music inside her. Sometimes, in the middle of a careful exercise, Chloe would drift off and play something else, a melody of her own that had just occurred to her. Henry would listen, his head tilted, and then might say, "That's a beautiful turn of phrase. Now, the fingering you used might hurt your hand if you play it fast. Let's find a stronger way to say it." The piano arrived at their apartment, a good, solid upright that fit snugly against the living room wall. It was not a trophy. It became part of the family's sounds. The clatter of dishes, the news on the radio, the thump of a basketball being bounced off the hallway wall, and weaving through it all, the sound of the piano. Sometimes it was halting scales. Sometimes it was the thunderous drama of a Beethoven piece she was learning to read. Sometimes it was the cheerful, repetitive riff from a pop song she'd heard that day. Elias kept his distance, but he kept his word. He paid for the lessons, for the occasional better instrument as she grew, for the summer music program she chose to attend. He became a quiet background figure, a patron who never demanded a performance. He would sometimes linger in the hallway of his own house when she had a lesson there, listening to the progression. He heard the wrong notes grow fewer. He heard the simple melodies become complex, powerful rivers of sound. But he also heard, always, the unmistakable heart in it. The fun, as she had called it. It was still there, now married to a formidable skill. Marla was the constant. She sat through every lesson in the big house, a book or some mending in her lap. She learned to read music a little herself, just to follow along. She was the one who made sure homework was done, who packed lunches for the summer programs, who held Chloe's head when she cried in frustration over a piece she couldn't master. She was the anchor, and because of her, the incredible gift never became a prison. The invitation, when it came, was not from Elias, it was from Henry, his voice crackling with a proud excitement over the phone. The city's youth symphony orchestra was holding auditions for a featured soloist for their anniversary concert. The piece was Rachmaninoff, famously difficult, a storm of emotion and technical demands. Henry believed Chloe, now 16, was ready, but only, he stressed, to all of them. If she wants to, Chloe wanted to. It was a new kind of map to explore, a mountain to climb just to see the view. The work was brutal. For months, their apartment was filled with the same tumultuous passages, repeated over and over, until the neighbors surely knew them by heart. Marla made endless cups of tea and learned the art of silent support. The day of the audition, Elias offered his car and driver. Marla and Chloe accepted. In the back of the quiet car, Chloe was silent, looking out at the city. "You know," she said softly to her mother, "I think I'm playing this for 3 people. For me, for you, and for him. Because he didn't make me." Marla took her hand and squeezed it. The concert hall was a cavern of golden light and velvet, a world away from the quiet music room where this had all begun. Backstage was a chaos of nervous teenagers in black clothes. Marla, in a simple blue dress she'd saved for, helped Chloe with the clip of a necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. Out in the audience, Elias Thorne sat alone. He had bought his own ticket. He felt strangely nervous, his palms damp. He saw Marla slip into a seat in the 3rd row. They exchanged a brief, acknowledging nod across the crowd. The orchestra played its opening pieces. Then, the moment arrived. The conductor made the announcement. The spotlight found the piano at the center of the stage, and she walked out. Not the small girl in faded jeans, but a young woman, poised and calm. She adjusted the stool, placed her hands in her lap for a moment, and took a breath that was visible even from where Elias sat. Then she began. The first notes were not thunder, but a deep, questioning pulse. Then the melody unfolded, and it was not just the notes Rachmaninoff had written. It was a story. It was the loneliness of a big, quiet house. It was the warmth of a mother's hand. It was the struggle of learning a new language. It was the joy of a secret map. The technique was flawless, the roaring octaves, the delicate, flying passages, but it was all in service of that story. She didn't just play the concerto, she lived it. The orchestra rose and fell around her like the sea, and she was the ship, navigating it with fearless grace. Elias listened, and something broke open in him. He had spent his life building, acquiring, solving. He had seen Chloe as another problem to be solved, a potential to be maximized. But as the music swelled, filling the vast hall, he understood his error completely. He hadn't built this. He hadn't solved anything. He had simply, finally, listened. And then he had gotten out of the way. The final chords crashed and then faded into a silence so deep it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Then the silence shattered into a roar. People were on their feet, clapping, shouting. Marla was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth. On stage, Chloe stood, her face shining with effort and relief. She bowed to the orchestra, to the conductor, and then to the audience. Her eyes found her mother in the third row, and a wide, genuine smile broke through her professional composure. Then, almost as an afterthought, she let her gaze sweep further back, until she found Elias. She gave a small, private nod. He nodded back, his throat too tight to smile. Later, there was a small celebration in a room backstage. There were other students, proud parents, Henry beaming like a lighthouse. Chloe was surrounded, accepting hugs and handshakes. Elias hung back at the edge of the room, feeling out of place. He was about to slip away when Chloe extracted herself from the crowd and walked over to him. She held two plastic cups of punch. "I thought you might leave without saying hello," she said, handing him one. "I didn't want to intrude," he said. I have no words, truly. "Thank you," she said. They stood in a quiet bubble amid the noise. "You know, I was thinking up there, during the quiet part in the second movement. I was thinking about that first day. You just wanted a little noise." He gave a short, genuine laugh. "I got rather more than I bargained for." "We all did," she said softly. Then she looked at him, her eyes clear and direct. "Thank you for listening. That day in your study, and for the gas money." The metaphor, their old, private joke, made him smile. "It was the best investment I ever made," he said. And he meant it not in terms of money or fame, but in terms of the sheer, humbling privilege of having witnessed the journey. He stayed a few minutes more, shared a quiet word with a proud, tearful Marla, and then made his exit. The night air was cool. His driver pulled up, but instead of going straight home, he found himself giving a different address. He went to his office, high in his glass tower. For a long time, he just looked out at the glittering city. He didn't feel the old emptiness. He felt full. He had learned something more valuable than any business principle, that the most beautiful things are not built, but grown, and they grow best when given light and space and just enough support to reach for the sun. Back in the mansion, the silence welcomed him, but it was different now. It was no longer empty. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that holds the echo of beautiful sounds. He walked to the music room and opened the door. The grand piano sat there in the moonlight from the window. He sat on the bench, the one she had sat on as a small girl. He didn't play. He couldn't. He just rested his hands on the closed lid. He could almost hear it, the ghost of a simple Mozart phrase, played with a child's discovering touch. It had been the first note of a symphony he didn't compose, but was forever grateful to have heard.